Hello and welcome back to the Scale Modelling Cafe, and welcome to the final part of the Arma Hurricane project. What I'm going to do now is a panel line wash with some oil paint that I've just put on some card just to leach away some of the linseed oil. I've kind of gone away from this technique. I normally will do a sludge wash, which kind of acts as a panel line wash, a filter, and also helps to highlight a lot of the surface detail. However, with this aeroplane, with this model, there's a lot of raised rivets, and what I didn't want to do is they'd be overemphasized in a sludge wash, and there's always a risk that in polishing the surface and getting rid of the excess, it can damage the paint on the raised detail. So it was back to a previous technique that I haven't used in a while, and that is a pin wash. So I'm just mixing up here a sort of dark grey blue tone for the underside. What I tend to do with washes, be that a sludge wash or a pin wash, is try and get a tone that is complementary to the colour underneath. Yes, you want contrast, otherwise there's no point in doing it, but you don't want too much contrast. So black washes on this sort of camouflage are definitely out. And you can see that I think I've probably gone a little bit too dark with the contrast, so I'm just going to add a little bit of this kind of light grey off-white colour just to lighten things up. Again, you want it of a consistency that capillary action is going to be your friend and it's going to flow. Sludge washes tend to be thicker. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to test it on the radiator here, just in case we have a bit of a disaster. But everything looks good. So the capillary action, it's easy for me to say. With a shiny undercoat, it's really good. You just touch the wash where you need it, and it will just pull itself along into the detail. And I'm just going to work my way around, just touching it in place into the recessed details. And if there's any raised details, I'll just touch it next to it, so some of the strengthening strips and things like that. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to highlight the rivets. Got a different technique in mind for that. And if you don't think that the wash is strong enough, you can either add a little bit more oil paint, make it a little bit thicker, or do a couple of coats. Also, what I tend to do is, in some areas, I'll have the wash a little bit heavier. If you look at photos and real aeroplanes, you'll see it's not an even effect over the entire airframe. I do think it's important to look at references when weathering. So towards the sort of centre section where it's going to get a little bit more dirty and grimy, I will actually do a couple of layers of this and just make it a little bit darker, a little bit more contrast where it's going to be dirtier and grungier. I'm also going to try and avoid the markings because I don't want any blue paint over the white. With the MRP, it's quite shiny, it's very glossy, so it's an easy job just to very gently with a cotton bud go in and just gently polish away some of the excess wash. It's not too much, but where it can be a little bit stubborn or you need to be a little bit more precise, you can go in with a brush, a small brush, moisten with a bit of thinner, and you can go in and you can start blending as well. I normally leave my wash around about half an hour or so to dry, and but it's not going to be rock solid. It's easy enough to go in and blend away then. And there you can see how shiny it is, but actually it's quite subtle, that effect. Now the top surface, and a sort of grey-brown tone for the middle stone, but exactly the same technique. It's quite runny stuff, and just touching it in the areas, just letting itself be pulled along into that recessed detail. With a disruptive camouflage like this, some of this lighter wash will go onto the darker areas, but that's not a problem because that's easily cleaned up. And now for the darker brown, and again, same point as last time really. So this darker wash, it's too dark for the middle stone. So if it runs onto the middle stone areas, not a problem. You can just go in and just clean it up. These oils are very forgiving. They stay malleable, if you like, for want of a better word, for quite some time. And I'll quite often go back and touch in and reapply it, and go backwards and forwards until I'm happy with the final result. And there you can see both tones on the airframe, and how it's all complementary. Same technique with the cotton bud, going in and just a gentle polish. Again, the final finish of the MRP makes this an absolute doddle. If you are using more matte type paints, then I do recommend going in with a varnish, just because it can stain the paint. Even if you can go in with a brush and some thinner, sometimes that's not enough. So there's some raised detail down the back end, and slightly more heavier polishing down here, because actually I thought the contrast was a little bit too stark. So I just went in and with the cotton bud just kind of removed it and blended it in a little bit more. And yes, you can use your finger as well. Just going in with the brush there, just moistening things up and blending away if there's any sort of errant wash. It's a little bit too contrasty. Okay, paint chipping. Quite good fun this. So using the sponge method first with the metal. In hindsight, I should have done the next bit with the lighter base colours first. But actually, I quite enjoyed how it turned out. So just going around the metal areas, obviously there's a lot of fabric on this aeroplane. But yeah, just making sure I'm just getting it in the metal areas. Areas of high wear, obviously wing roots, especially inboard, where the propeller is going to kick up a whole load of dust and stones and small bits and pieces that are going to just ding that paintwork. What am I talking about? Paintwork. And yeah, I'm going for a sort of more scuffed look. So there's not an awful lot of paint there, actually. So yeah, as I said, going for a more scuffed look rather than a chipped look where the wing root is. Backing up by brush now, and this is where we can get really precise. So this is ammo steel mixed with water, about 50-50 actually. You want quite a thin mix, and just going in and using a sort of tapping motion, just going in and applying the chips. As you can see, really precise there, along panel lines, as you can see. So using the chips to sort of break out the different panels as well. And then enhancing some of the chips that was done with the sponge. So filling in areas and adding to the areas. And I find this stage very therapeutic. If you're a little bit too heavy-handed with this paint, it's okay. You can use a bit of enamel thinner just to clean things up. And you go in with some oils over the top just to tone things down if you need to. But you'll see what I do a little bit later on. So again, adding it around some of the hatches and panels. Right, this is the new Ammo paint, the Atom acrylic paint. These are prototypes. It's going to be released in the first quarter of 2024. And what I do with this stuff, it brushes really nicely. So I just thin it down with a little bit of water, and I mix a tone that is lighter than the base tone. And I'm just going to go in and a little bit like an Arma technique, this. Just going in and just doing some dings and some scuffs. The paint chips don't always go right through to the metal. If you look at close-up pictures of these aeroplanes, they did get scuffed, and as opposed to sort of chipped. So just going and working my way around. Again, you think that might be too stark, too bright a tone, but as the paint dries, because it is quite thin, it does actually dry back. You can see it drying back there as I'm applying it, really. It's drying pretty quickly. And there's other effects that are going to go on over the top anyway. So if anything, as I said before, when I was doing the faded paint, if the contrast is a little bit too high, then it doesn't matter, because it's all going to get toned down and blended in. Talking of toning down and blending in, I'm going to do a filter. So a filter is a very, very thin wash. The idea is just to tint the paint. Now the models had a coat of VMS satin, and you don't really want to do this over a gloss coat. You do want a sort of a matte or satin finish, because you want the filter to stain the paint. And as you can see, it's very subtle. It's almost like dirty thinners going on. And what this will do is this will just blend everything together. So I'm mixing up this sort of grimy tone, and it's not a wash. So I'm not sort of letting it accumulate in panel lines, things like that. We've done the panel line wash. I'm very happy with how that's turned out. So I'm just applying it liberally in a nice even coat, making sure that the paint doesn't run, because if it does run, then it can sort of pull. And you can see how shiny it looks. That's actually the filter itself. It's not the gloss coat. It has had a satin varnish. And now I'm going on with a sort of dusty tone. Obviously this is a desert aeroplane. This is going to simulate dust accumulations. It's going to simulate paint fading. And you can see how it's working with those raised rivets over the wing. Now, I fly aeroplanes in the desert, and I can tell you they get pretty filthy pretty quickly. And ours are trainers, and they have a glossy finish, and they get minging. In fact, scheduled maintenance is to wash them, and wash them regularly. So you can just imagine how filthy a matte combat aeroplane got. So just going backwards and forwards with this filter, and you can see there the difference between the wing that I'm just drying with a hairdryer and the rest of the airframe, which hasn't been done yet. It's quite subtle, the effect, and you can see how it sort of blends the camouflage and the chipping and just brings everything together. I did want a little bit more dust though, so using Ammo's oil brushes, using the applicator, just touching in the dusty tone, you can see where I'm concentrating it around the middle. That's where the dust and grime and dirt is going to accumulate on the central fuselage. And then I'm just going in with quite a wet brush actually to blend it all in. This is a kind of like a wet blend, if you like, and it's going to do a really good job of sort of collecting around all that raised detail, some of the strengthening bits, the rivets, that kind of thing, and just sort of feathering it out. Now I've got like almost like another filter coat the further away I get, but I'm just blending that in. As you can see, it is quite wet, so it will run, but that's exactly what I want. And if you're a little bit heavy-handed or you don't like it, you can just remove it with thinners. And I'll hit that with the hairdryer. Now on a slow one, because I don't want it to run away. But you can see you get that lovely sort of dusty effect. And because that was such a success, I thought I'd do it on the top side as well. I also did it underneath the tailplane, and the rear fuselage, lower rear fuselage of these aeroplanes got really quite dusty as well. So as you can see, this is a kind of a layered effect. So I've tinted the base coat. We've done the chipping, different sorts of chipping, scuffs as well as chips down to the metal. We've done filter coats, a grimy filter coat and a dusty filter coat. Now we're going in with more dust over the top. But note how it's not even over the entire airframe. I'm concentrating it in certain areas. If you're too uniform over the whole thing, you'll kind of lose the effect a bit. And you can see how when we just hit it with a hairdryer and it just goes off, how it's going to dry. If it's too much, you can just go in and reduce it down with more thinner. Which is what I'm doing now. So I thought that was a little bit too much. So just going in with some thinner, and I'm going to do a little bit more blending. Now for some darker, oily, more tones. And this is black, as you can see, and just applying some dots. And we'll just blend that into the paintwork. So what this is doing is adding grime now. We've added the dust. Now we're going in to add the grime. So you can see where I'm concentrating it along sort of panel lines, in the nooks and crannies, in the wing root there, around the fuel filler cap where grime is going to accumulate. Quite subtle on the middle stone areas. We don't want to overdo it too much. And just blending that in. And then I'll go in with a, when that's dry, I'll go in with a dry brush and again further blend it in. And then going back in, this is more of a sort of oily, grimy tone, and concentrating it just around these panels. Looking at some of the photographs, that's exactly how it did on the real thing. Just going with a little bit more localized dust now. You can see there sort of along the panel lines, along the walkway, where it's going to accumulate in the sort of corners. This brush is a little bit drier than before. I don't want to remove too much, and I want it more local, if that makes sense. And then just going in with a completely dry brush for the sort of final blend. And you can see it's very much more local there. It's going to create interest for the eye. The underside of World War II aeroplanes got really quite dirty and grimy. This is a oily sort of brown tone that I mixed up, maybe with a hint of green in there as well, and I'm just streaking it back with the airflow. Obviously here I haven't added the radiator yet, and this is all deliberate. The fit was absolutely perfect, so I added that a little bit later, after I'd added a little bit of detail, some of the missing detail actually on the radiator, the actuating arms for the flap and the strengthening strut in the front. They were all added from a bit of wire, but all done later. And now doing a little bit more local oil work with a smaller brush, just being a little bit more precise now. And just along some of that raised detail as well. The bottom of our aeroplanes, near the air brake especially, get really quite dirty. It's quite difficult to see because our aeroplanes are dark blue, but when you're doing your pre-flight walk round, you can just see how much oil and stuff is accumulating there. And even on display aeroplanes, you know, you look at some of the red arrows, they get really quite dirty really quite quickly. People think they're polished every day. They're not, and they will accumulate this kind of maybe not to this extent obviously, but you know, even the most pristine aeroplanes will have some sort of oil and dirt on them. So I tend to use the hairdryer a lot. It's just not in shot here, but I am using the hairdryer just to dry things off before going in with this dryer brush. Actually not here, this isn't the dry brush, this is still the damp brush, just touching things up. Here's the dry brush. And just going in with these cordite stains. So obviously we've got the darker areas of the base coat around these sort of gun ports, and this is just adding to that overall effect, just moving the stuff out of the way so you can have a nicer look. Right. Now, this is a thicker wash, and what I'm going to do now is do some speckling. I really like this speckling technique. I've used it for a long time actually. So when I was in my Arma phase, quite a long time ago now, I really ought to get back into some Arma. Mig Jimenez on his videos would spray dirt and mud with an airbrush on a loaded brush. I just thought that was a little bit too indiscriminate, so I thought, I wonder what happens if you flick it, and it worked an absolute treat, and I've been doing that ever since. It can be quite precise, but you do need to adjust the mixture, not too thin, not too thick, and just practice on a bit of scrap. Just make sure you've got the consistency right, and then once I've applied it, I will go in with the brush and just blend away any of the sort of speckles that are just too thick, frankly. Now for some post shading. So this is a like a dirty kind of colour, again sort of dirty thinners. Turning the airbrush, the airflow right down. Always keep the airbrush moving, otherwise some of the thinner can actually remove some of the paint. And I'm going to use the same mixture, albeit just a little bit thicker, for the exhaust stain. Now, some of these Desert Hurricanes, the exhaust stains were really prominent. In fact, there's a well-known photo of some Desert Hurricanes where they've actually painted out where the exhaust stain goes. So using the photographs to get the pattern right, I go in with the sort of the really dark dirty brown, and then go in with a much lighter tone in the middle, and again you get that sense of depth. Undercarriage doors, they had some extra wiring added. These are the drop tanks. These are really heavily weathered, but they fit absolutely beautifully. Plug them into place. You can see I've added the gear here. I didn't film adding the gear because it just clicked into place, so there's nothing to show really. This shot is of the clear lenses that have just gone on over the top. That is just the push fit. Here are the exhausts and the canopy. So all the final bits now, I added these sort of handles from a bit of wire. Propeller going on. I'm using the Ammo Ultra Glue here, the sort of PVA stuff. It's actually not PVA, it's resin. But I'm going to get a lot of working time, and it is quite rubberized, if you like. So just spinning the proper bit, just making sure the glue is distributed. Final touches now, and just the sort of gun sight post at the front. That's from a bit of steel wire inserted into a hole I drilled. And that's the end of the project. This is my favourite kit in my collection, and it's the favourite kit that I've ever built. It's just beautiful. The details outstanding, the engineering and fit is amazing, and I just think it's absolutely gorgeous, and I've got more on order, so I will be doing some more. I really hope you've enjoyed this series, and I wanted, as I said at the start, to concentrate more on the weathering in a separate episode. I hope you'll agree that it was worthwhile, so thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next project.
But now, yeah, make all the demons quiet, yeah. We were built to thrive, yeah. I think that we've all had enough. What keeps you up at night, yeah. Make all the demons quiet, yeah. We were built to thrive, yeah.